G'day guys! In a couple of weeks I'm going to be attending the Australian ITC Championships where I'm going to be running the World Eaters, and I have 5 different lists, each of which I think are more than capable of winning this major ITC event, and I'm struggling to choose which one to run. So I thought, what better way to decide than to make a video breaking down each of these lists, what the differences are between them, and the reasoning behind those differences so that you can help me decide in the comments of this video which list I'm going to run. And then when I take it to the event, I'll be giving updates throughout the event as well as a summary post-event to talk about the list that we decided to bring, what worked, what didn't work, and what the plan is for the World Eaters going forward. So with that being said, let's get stuck into the video.
Slog for the Blood God.
Alrighty guys, before we start talking about the specifics of the lists, I just want to touch on that you will notice throughout this video that many of the lists share some integral components. Now the reason that is I'm sure you've experienced this yourself, is you often know for sure some of the units that you definitely want to take, and it's that last sort of 500 points where you have a little bit of wiggle room where you're not 100% sure what you want to do and how you want to adapt the list for the particular meta you're expecting. So in this video, you will notice that a lot of the lists look similar, but there are some very notable differences within them, and we're going to break those down in detail for you here. And then you can help me decide which one of those components should I include for this singles event. So this list in front of me here is the one that I took to the Victorian Team Championships, and I placed second overall. My team placed second overall in that event, and I only lost a single game with this list. So it was very, very powerful. However, that was in a team's environment where I was able to some extent select which opponents I wanted to play, and I wrote the list specifically for teams so that it could be a particularly powerful weapon in the pairings process for specific opponents. But let's go through the list. Starts off with Angron. He's absolutely mandatory in every World Eaters list in my opinion. He's an absolute beat stick, and he unlocks a lot of power in the other units via rerolls, and also his ability to resurrect and problem solve and fly and all the things. He's amazing. Next, we have Khan the Betrayer. He rides solo in this list, so he doesn't attach to a unit. He just runs around on his own and he's an annoying little dude who can rapid ingress, he can charge things, he fights on death, he does decent damage, and he's only 80 points. He's an absolute steal. Then we go into our battle line units. So we've got 2 units of Khorne Berserkers in this list. Now, both of them have a Master of Executions. One of them has the Berserker's Glaive. Now you'll notice he will be in almost every list as well. 10 Berserkers with the Master of Executions with the Glaive is an absolute powerhouse of damage capacity, so they're really, really effective. And then we have a second one. That second guy has the Favored of Khorne Relic, and he's in another unit of 10. Now this makes this army really formidable into other combat armies, because I have 2 big, heavy damage dealing units that have fights first. So that can be very difficult for combat armies to navigate. Then we have a unit of Jackals along the front there. They're mandatory. They'll be in every list as well. They stick at your home objective. They're difficult to kill with indirect because they're going to have 5 up, feel no pains. They're just a really efficient way of controlling your backfield, screening it out so your opponent can't get behind you. They're really, really helpful as well. We've got a single Rhino over here. Now that Rhino is going to be used for the Khorne Berserkers. Generally what I'll do is I'll start one unit inside, which is generally going to be the Master of Execution with the Glaive inside, and the one with the Favored of Khorne is going to sit behind the Rhino. And in those first or second turns, I'm going to disembark out, advance and charge and go do damage with them, and then reload the Rhino with the second unit, so that in the second or third turn I can do it again. And generally speaking, you're going to be able to deploy that Rhino or position that Rhino somewhere where it's safe. Your opponent can't shoot it. They can't really kill it with combat because there's Berserkers all around it and there's all these other elements happening. So the Rhino is staged, and with the distance those Berserkers can travel, they can generally threaten any of the objectives that are in no man's land from that staged Rhino. So being able to have 2 turns where you can launch out these massive Berserker bombs, really, really powerful. Then we supplement that with the Lord Invocatus and 3 units of Exalted Eightbound. Now, generally what we're going to do there is we're not going to attach Lord Invocatus. We're going to put one of those Exalted Eightbound in reserves, and they're generally going to rapid ingress and do their damage from that vector. And then the other two are going to gain the scout move from the Lord Invocatus and scout forward into positions where they're either going to go for a turn 1 strike, or they're going to scout forward into positions where they can very easily threaten strikes later, or they're going to put themselves in positions where they can't get hit. So if you're going up against a real heavy shooting army, you might be able to position these guys forward so that when you scout move into a ruin somewhere, they're not going to be able to get angles on you, but you're closer to them than you would have otherwise been. So the 2 scouting Exalted Eightbound, 1 in strat reserves for rapid ingress and Lord Invocatus is a nice effective little package. And then we round it out with a single unit of regular Eightbound. They also have the scout move, so they're going to fulfill a similar role to the Exalted Eightbound. However, they can go in and give reroll 1s to wound to either the Berserkers or Angron or the other Eightbound, which is very effective. And they also bring 3 damage weapons, so they're fantastic at killing things like Terminators or Chosen. So that's the list, and this is the baseline. This is a list that I'm really happy with, and it performed quite well for me. So any decisions that we make have to be better than this. So let's have a look at some of the alternative options that I've come up with, and let's get a conversation going in the comments below about what you think about this list and the various other options. Alrighty, for this second list, we've made some very minor changes to my VTC list. What we've done is we've dropped Khan the Betrayer, we've dropped the Master of Executions that had the Favored of Khorne relic, and we've dropped 10 Berserkers. And in exchange for that, we've got the Juggernaut Lord with the Favored of Khorne relic, so we still have that ability to reroll our Blessings rolls. And then instead of Khan and the Berserkers, we've added in 3 units of 2 more units of regular 8-bound, so we now have 3. So now the list is Angron, Berserkers with Glaive Mo in a Rhino, 10 Jackals, Lord Invocatus, Juggernaut Lord, 3 units of Exalted 8-bound, and 3 units of regular 8-bound. Now, the thing that this list does that the VTC list doesn't do is has more trading elements, because instead of having Khan and Mo in 1 unit, and Mo and Berserkers as 1 unit, and then Khan as a separate, so we've got 2 units. We've traded that to get 2 units of regular 8-bound and the Juggernaut Lord, so we've got an additional unit. And the other thing that this does is it brings the regular 8-bound, which have lots of 3 damage attacks, which are really good into the current meta. So this is what I call an example of a meta call, where while comparing 8-bound to Berserkers can be tricky, what you do is you look at it and you're like, well, hang on, Berserkers have mostly 1, some 2 damage attacks. Whereas one of the big bad guys in the current meta is Chaos Space Marines with Chosen, who are 3 wound models. So being able to put in regular 8-bound with their 3 damage Lacerators makes this list much better into that matchup. And also, one of the things that the Chaos Space Marines do really, really well that the World Eaters struggle with is they have lots and lots of small units. They have Warp Talons running around, they have small units of Accursed Cultists, then they have all of their Chosen units, then they have Legionaries, they have Raptors, they have lots and lots of small units that are really effective at trading up into the World Eaters. So by increasing the number of units, increasing the number of things I have to play with, that's going to give me a slight edge in that matchup. If you want to learn more about trading games like that, where you're talking about trading units, check out my video I did recently called The Art of the Trade, and in that I break down the importance of this and how to work it out. But essentially this list is optimized for that playstyle, where I'm going to be basically throwing units of 8-bound in to kill units of Chosen, trading back and forth, and hopefully I'm going to win that trading game and thus win more victory points. So that's my second list. Let's jump right into the third. Alrighty, this next list takes the philosophy in a completely different direction. Instead of going for that MSU trading element, what we've done is we've dropped Lord Invocatus and we've dropped all of the regular 8-bound, and we've used those points to add in a Khorne Lord of Skulls and a second unit of Jackals. So the new list is Angron, 2 units of Jackals, Berserkers, Mo with the Glaive, Rhino, and 3 units of Exalted 8-bound, and the Juggernaut Lord. Now the idea around this list is optimizing for the resurrection of Angron and also bringing some shooting damage that every other list in this video is going to sorely lack. So the idea here is you're going to strat reserves the Lord of Skulls often so that it can come on and get angles, because we're going to be playing pretty dense terrain, so it's hard for the Lord of Skulls to move around terrain pieces, get its charges off, etc. So bringing that in from strategic reserves allows you to pick the vector that you want to come on and somewhat mitigate the terrain challenges. And then we've got 2 units of Jackals, so we're often going to have Jackals on objective markers. We have the Lord of Skulls killing things, which is going to allow us to modify our Blessings rolls there. And we also have the Juggle Lord giving us rerolls to our Blessing rolls. And all of this combined dramatically increases the probability of Angron being resurrected, which means that in this list, Angron can play hyper aggressive. He is just always advancing and charging something every turn. Sometimes 2 things, killing as much as he can. Your opponent is going to have no choice but to deal with him, and then you're likely to resurrect him. So that's the idea with this list. It has a lot of the same elements from previous lists, but it leans more heavily on the Angron resurrection angle. And that Lord of Skulls is also very tough, deals pretty heavy damage, and is going to be able to come on from those angles, making Angron's resurrections easier, securing objectives on his own right, and doing heavy damage. He also facilitates the ability to pop transports with his shooting, which does make the Eightbound and the Berserkers more viable in this list, because sometimes one of the things that they struggle with is if something's inside of a Rhino, it's hard for us to damage it because we have to kill it before we can kill the things inside, and being that we do all of our damage in a single phase, that can be somewhat more difficult than we would like. So being able to do that damage with the Lord of Skulls in the shooting phase is absolutely fantastic. He can also tank shock in the charge phase, which is another really nifty way of blowing up a transport before the fight phase. So he can charge something, do his tank shock, blow it up, then the guys fall out, it's still my charge phase, so then the Berserkers can charge the thing that fell out. So that's a really cool way of doing more damage and dealing with those transports. This is a really interesting list. My concern with this list is that the terrain may be punishing and may make the Lord of Skulls unplayable. Previously, I've ran 2 or even 3 at tournaments, and they have done amazing work. They are damage-dealing motherfuckers. They are tough as nails. They are really, really good. My concern is that the terrain's going to punish me. However, I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. Let's jump into the next list. Alrighty, for this list, we take a slight deviation from what we've seen so far, and we include some demon allies. Now, this is a very specific anti-meta pick, which we'll go through in detail. But first, let's break down the list. We've got Angron again, as always. We've got the Master of Executions with the Glaive in his 10 Berserkers in their Rhino, as we have in every other list. We've also got 10 Jackals, this time only 10, we don't have the 2 units. Then we have the Juggernaut with the Favored of Khorne Relic, and 3 units of Exalted Eightbound, as we have in pretty much every list. So that's the staple stuff, that's what's locked in. In this list, we have got Lord Invocatus to give scout moves to those Exalted Eightbound, and the thing that's different about this list is we have the Rendmaster as an allied Khorne Demon, and then we have the Skulltaker with 10 Bloodletters. Now, you may be thinking Bloodletters, Skulltaker, these are really odd picks, but this is a very specific anti-Chaos Space Marine meta. So the idea is Chaos Space Marines have made 3 wound models really, really popular because Chosen are really, really good, and then the Terminators are also really, really good, and then other factions also do similar things like the regular Space Marines. They're quite popular right now. 3 wound models are everywhere. And the problem with the World Eaters is they don't have much in the way of 3 damage attacks. Most of their attacks, like the Eightbound, are 2 damage, or the Berserkers are 1 damage, or even Angron, he either has the big D6 plus 2 or 2 damage attacks. So being able to chew through those 3 wound models can be quite taxing for the World Eaters. So the idea here is all the Bloodletters are damage 2, but the Rendmaster has an ability where he can select an enemy unit at the start of the fight phase, and if you're charging it with demons like these Bloodletters, it gets +1 strength, AP, and damage. Now that's going to push these Bloodletters up to strength 6, AP 3, 3 damage. Now that profile is exceptionally good at killing Chosen. And also, the Skulltaker, he hits almost as hard as the glaive-wielding Master of Execution, so he hits like a freight train himself, and he also has precision, which means those people running around with 10 Chosen with a Chaos Lord inside, and their plan is, I'm going to use Armor of Contempt and I'm going to make this unit really, really tough. This unit will delete that very consistently, because he goes in, he precisions out the character, kills that Chaos Lord, and then all of these guys with their 3 damage AP3 weapons, even if they use the Armor of Contempt, they're only going to get 5 up saves, and they're going to be hit by 3 damage. He also gives the unit devastating wounds, which means that if I roll any 6s to wound, and the unit does have reroll 1s to wound, they're going to do a ton of damage. Now, the deficit of this list is that that Bloodletter unit is exceptionally fragile, which means it's going to have to rapid ingress, because if it starts on the table, it's just going to get killed. It's going to have to rapid ingress, and it's also going to have to play around Overwatch, because these guys are only 1 wound each with a 5-up invulnerable save. A couple of heavy flamers becomes a real problem for this unit. So having to play around Overwatch is a challenge, but the damage capacity on this is probably higher than what we've seen in the other lists. And that Rend Master is an absolute beat stick on his own right. So he goes in, he's only 150 points, and he does probably more damage than he did of Exalted Eightbound. So he's really good, as is this unit. I think this is a really interesting take, specifically when you're expecting lots of 3 wound models. If you're going into a meta where everything is 1 or 2 wounds or more than that, like Knights for example, and you don't really care whether you're doing, 3 increments of 2 damage or 2 increments of 3 damage, right? You don't really care either way, because you've got to chip up to that 10 wounds to kill it, then you don't need this. But I think in this particular meta, where those 3 wound models are going to be very popular and very dominant, because the top factions all have high prevalence of 3 wound models, that's when you want to start considering options like this that are a specific scalpel designed to eliminate certain threats. So that's the 4th list. Now let's break into the 5th and final list that I'm considering for the Australian ITC Championships. Alrighty guys, this last list leans a little bit harder into the Demon Allies and sort of takes that philosophy that we talked about in the last list to its natural conclusion. So what we've done is we've dropped one of the units of Exalted Eightbound and turned that into regular Eightbound to bring additional 3 damage attacks. Then we've dropped Lord Invocatus and the Bloodletters and the Skulltaker and used those points to instead get a Blood Hunter and the 5 Juggernauts, the Bloodcrushers. Now, the idea with this list is it takes that to the next level. So we've got these guys are all similarly going to get the buff from the Rend Master, and they're going to be doing those 3 damage attacks. But these guys are significantly tougher than the Bloodletters, so they don't have the risk of Overwatch death, and they also don't have the risk of just getting killed in the subsequent turns. They're very tough, toughness 7, 4-up invulnerable saves, hard to push through. And they also do significantly more damage on the charge. While they get less of those blade attacks, because there's only the 6 of them instead of the 11 from the previous squad, the Juggernauts themselves provide additional attacks, and these guys do mortal wounds on the charge. So the damage capacity and the durability from this unit goes up. The 8-bound get replaced with, or the Exalted 8-bound get replaced with regular 8-bound, which makes them more effective. And also in this version of the list, we have an additional unit of Jackals, which means we can play a little bit more with that backfield, we can secure objectives a little bit more, whilst our opponent tries to deal with this unit of Bloodcrushers. So that rounds out the final list. Now, I am genuinely torn between these lists. As you will have noticed, all of them have some very consistent elements. The Berserkers with the Mo in the Rhino, every list. Jackals, every list. Angron, every list. Some variation of 8-bound, every list. So those elements I'm very confident with, and they are very, very powerful. They are sort of the core of what a World Eaters list looks like these days. But it's the elements around it that I'm yet to decide on. Do I want to take my tried and tested VTC list, the one that I've successfully defeated multiple different opponents with, including some Chaos Space Marine players? Do I want to take that and just rely on what I know works? Or do I want to adapt and evolve with time and do things like consider bringing the Juggernauts, bringing the Rend Master? Do I want to consider something where instead of the Berserkers, I just take more 8-bound and I lean harder into the MSU, multiple small units, trading style game? Or do I want to go crazy and bring a Lord of Skulls back? I did really, really well with them at some recent tournaments. Granted, that was got different terrain packs, so that could be a challenge going forward, but is it worth resurrecting that old playstyle and bringing that Lord of Skulls and utilizing his heavy shooting damage and his heavy durability to leverage myself into wins? It's a genuinely difficult decision to make. So I implore you to jump in the comments below and let me know which of these 5 lists you enjoyed the most, which one you would like to see played at an 8-round major event down here in Australia. And obviously I'll be reporting back with details from the games, and I'll be able to talk about what worked and what didn't work, and we can sort of go on this journey together to an extent. So yeah, that's the video. Thank you very much for tuning in. Before you go, I do implore you to check out blogforthebloodgod.com. That's my website, and there's a ton of information on there about how you can support the channel and help me produce these videos more regularly, provide more detailed commentary, more detailed videos, and also improve the quality. I desperately need some new microphones. I desperately need some new equipment for the studio, and it's all ridiculously expensive. And as you can see, I already blow almost all of my disposable income on Warhammer. So it's hard to try to balance those things. So any support that you do provide over on that website is fantastically appreciated. So you can get shirts like this, you can get battle mats like this, I've got objective markers, I've got dice, all really cool ways to purchase things that give a little bit of money to me and something cool to yourself. Or you can join our Patreon, get over on our Discord. We do regular phone call training sessions, coaching, one-on-one, list advice, all sorts of stuff to help you bring your game to the next level. So if you want to do that, that's also very much appreciated and is a great way of supporting the channel. With that being said, I'm going to leave it here. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.
The Warhammer community suffers from some of the most prohibitively expensive essentials in the world, especially Australian content creators. Every single day, Dean wants to create content, but he can't. Suffering from old, worn-out brushes, expensive model kits, and costly software and equipment he can't endure much longer. Just look at this dirty paint water. Would you drink this? Would you let your child? Even a small monthly donation can help provide Dean with clean paint water, basic tools for survival, and access to life-saving information and education. So please, follow the links in the description below and find out how you can sponsor a mad cunt like Dean today and end the suffering. Suffering that is cruel, unsustainable, and your fault.